greatest achievement would not be her fame. It would be her children. To them would fall the benefits and burdens of the Kennedy legacy. And the public face of that legacy was now John F. Kennedy, Jr.
Last night at around 10:15, my mother passed on. She was surrounded by her friends and her family and her books and the people and the things that she loved.
In the wake of his mother's death, 33-year-old John F. Kennedy Jr. emerged as the face of the Kennedys. Whether he would become more than that was a question that captivated the public.
John Jr. Inherited the Kennedy myth. People who hated the Kennedys, and there were a lot of them, didn't hate John Jr.
He had a sense that sooner or later he was going to have to step up to that plate, or people would think that he was cowardly. I think that his feeling was that he had plenty of time. He had all the time in the world.
In the summer of 1988, JFK Jr. addressed the Democratic National Convention in Atlanta.
Over a quarter century ago, my father stood before you to accept the nomination for the presidency of the United States.
He had known the view from beneath the president's desk. Now the talk inevitably began that he would someday sit behind it.
Somebody once asked him, what would you do if you woke up one morning and discovered you'd been elected president? And his first remark was, I think the first thing I'd do would be to call Uncle Teddy and gloat.
Growing up in the public eye, he was the young prince, then the gangly teen, and finally, America's hunk. Like any Kennedy, he pushed himself physically.
He was not a reckless risk taker, but he liked risk. And he liked that heightened sense of life that you get when you're right on the edge.
As the son of Camelot, he wore his legacy lightly and never lost his sense of humor. The combination helped him shrug off the obsessive attention the tabloids paid to his very successful love life and his not-so-successful stabs at the New York bar exam.
I'll be back there in July, and I'll pass it then, or I'll pass it the next time, or I'll pass it when I'm 95.
The ironies were lost on no one in 1995 when JFK Jr. announced his riskiest and most public venture.
I don't think that I've seen as many of you in one place since they announced the results of my first bar exam.
A glossy monthly that would chart the convergence of politics and celebrity.
Ladies and gentlemen, meet George.
It was a culture his grandfather had helped create, his dad had embodied, and he understood as well as anyone.
The marriage of publishing and politics, it simply weaves together two strands of my family's business.
But by this time, JFK Jr. had begun to distance himself from his cousin's controversies. In a September 1997 column in George, he called Joe and Michael poster boys for bad behavior.
Well, I guess my first reaction was, ask not what you can do for your cousin, but what you can do for his magazine.
There was a gradual process by which John was constantly moving toward an independent self-definition. I mean, he felt himself to be more his mother's son than his father's, and was.
In 1996, JFK Jr. married a 30-year-old PR executive for designer Calvin Klein named Carolyn Bessette. But settling down only went so far. All his life, John Jr. had been captivated by flying. He bought a Buckeye, a three-wheeled paraglider with an engine. He showed up to fly it wearing a helmet with the insignia of his Uncle Joe Jr.'s fighter squadron.
He loved flying that thing. And he'd be up there just a dot against the sky. And you could just imagine how happy he was.
Jackie feared for his safety. Out of respect for her, John waited to get his pilot's license until after she died. In 1998, he told USA Today, "The only person I've been able to get to go up with me who looks forward to it as much as I do, is my wife. On Friday, July 16, 1999, John Jr. was scheduled to fly with Carolyn and Carolyn's sister Lauren, first to Martha's Vineyard, then on to his cousin Rory's wedding in Hyannisport. Shortly after 8 p.m. at the Essex County Airport in Fairfield, New Jersey, he began prepping his high-performance Piper Saratoga II. At 8:38, 12 minutes after sunset, the plane took off. Rory Kennedy's rehearsal dinner was winding down when word reached the Kennedy compound that JFK Jr.'s plane had failed to arrive as scheduled on Martha's Vineyard.